Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us at the session Intersections, Arts, and Californians for the Arts has arranged for all meetings today to offer closed captioning. If you'd like to turn that feature off, the bottom right hand of your Zoom screen provides you that option. Today's programs will be recorded for future viewing and availability. I want to direct everyone to the chat box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. During today's webinar, this will be the best way to communicate with your fellow participants as well as the panelists. Please go ahead and test it out by introducing yourself and sharing how you are affiliated with the arts community and where you're located. Just like in-person meetings, Californians for the Arts expects that all attendees represent themselves and treat each other fairly with mutual respect. As you review the slide on the screen, understand that Californians for the Arts recognizes the radical change is required to address centuries of racial, economic, social, and cultural injustice in our state and in our country. As the only comprehensive multidisciplinary organization focused on advancing and building public awareness of the value and impact of arts, culture, and creativity in California, we acknowledge the necessity of conducting ourselves with attention to these histories and their ongoing impacts. During the program today, the chat box will remain open during the entire session. At this time, I'd like to introduce Steph Johnson from Voices of Our City Choir to introduce our performance for today.
Hello, am I unmuted? Excellent. Hi, everybody. My name is Steph. Look at there I am with a guitar back when I wasn't an executive director and I used to just play guitar. Our organization, Voices of Our City Choir, was created about 5 years ago for people experiencing homelessness. Through the music, through coming together, and through community, we have helped like over 70 people move off the street. It's an incredible project, and we've just gone in the studio and recorded this song. And this is the song that was written by the choir called Sounds of the Sidewalk. And it was also our golden buzzer moment on America's Got Talent. So it features our choir members. They are a part of all the art that we make. So you'll see them in the video, and these are all their ideas. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for having us today.
Come on, sir. Get your bag. I don't mean to be mean, but we can't sleep here.
Friends I've never known, they're trying to look up. Mothers holding babies, trying not to cry. Strangers shouting verses, trying to teach me why.
Hopeful eyes searching, restless arms reaching. Our battles going down, with chaos all around. And the mother reassures herself everything will be alright as she steps in rhythm to the sounds of the sidewalk.
Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. And I got the music in my soul, and I got the hope for tomorrow. Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. Take the time to look into each other's eyes. You see me? There we'll find our common spirit on the rise. From the grit and grind and walking that fine line, changing failure into dreams I set afire. Gotta keep that hope for tomorrow with my dignity inside. What's mine is yours to borrow. Together we touch the sky. The struggle is over. The future is open, and I'm rolling, rolling, rolling. Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk. Listen to the sounds of the sidewalk.
Thank you, Steph Johnson and the Voices of Our City Choir for such an inspiring performance and a really great way to kick off our panel discussion today. I'm Jennifer Lane, Executive Director of the San Benito County Arts Council, a local arts agency based in Hollister, California. And I'm also a board member with Californians for the Arts, the statewide arts advocacy organization who's behind our virtual arts convening today. I will be serving as moderator for this panel presentation titled Intersections, Arts and, which will explore the ways in which arts and culture intersect with virtually everything, from public health and transportation to infrastructure and economic and workforce development. We have an esteemed lineup of speakers who will inspire and educate us, as well as leave us with a set of tools and resources to become better advocates in our own communities. Each presentation will take approximately 10 minutes, and we hope to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. I encourage you to post your questions in the chat, and if a speaker is available to answer you directly, they'll do so in the chat. And if not, we might pick it up for a broader discussion during Q&A. So please do not be shy to post your questions. And with that, I would like to begin our introductions for our speakers today. So our first speaker is Marie Acosta. Marie is a fellow CFTA board member. She is an actor, writer, director, and producer and project manager in the arts for over 30 years. Since 2008, she has led Sacramento's Latino Center of Arts and Culture as the artistic and executive director. She has conceptualized, curated, and managed new programs, including an outdoor celebration of Dia de los Muertos and theater production La Pastorela de Sacramento. Marie is a registered member of the Southern California Tongva Tribe of Indians, recognized by the state of California. And she has a BA in political science from Cal State Northridge. Welcome, Marie. Our next speaker, Jason Foster, is the president and COO of Destination Crenshaw. Prior to joining Destination Crenshaw, Jason served as the director of strategic partnerships at River LA, where he helped to build the nonprofit organization from its inception and worked closely with partners to grow the civic pride and social responsibilities surrounding the LA River. Before moving to Los Angeles, Jason worked as a project manager for Impact Brooklyn, where he managed multiple affordable housing projects. He has also worked as a community organizer and has been involved with campaign policy, strategy, and coordination. Jason holds a BA in Business Administration and Finance from Howard University and an MBA from the Metropolitan College of New York. He currently lives in South Los Angeles with his wife and 2 children. Welcome, Jason. Our next speaker, Mallory Rukhsana Nizam, is a cross-sector cultural maker who loves cities and believes that we have the tools to make them more just and joyful. She specializes in public art, creative placemaking, keeping and knowing, organizational development, strategic planning, and the public domain. Through her cross-sector practice, Justice and Joy, she engages stakeholders across sectors to de-silo the way we run cities and build new models of creative interdisciplinary collaboration. Mallory holds a Master's of Design from Harvard's Graduate School of Design, is a 2020 Monument Lab Transnational Fellow, and is currently the curator of partnerships and programs for Forward, a publication by Forecast Public Art. Mallory seeks to be in every room she's not supposed to be in. I love that last line. Welcome, Mallory. Our next speaker, Katrina Pineda, is the California representative for the Arts Health Early Career Research Network. She is a design manager for a young children's educational app, an arts and health advocate, and a volunteer and research assistant for various organizations and initiatives. Katrina has her MA in Arts and Medicine and her BFA in Multimedia Arts. Last summer, she was part of an interdisciplinary research lab with the University of Florida that worked on building out a repository demonstrating the intersection of arts and health in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Katrina. And our last speaker, Ben Stone, currently serves as Director of Arts and Culture of Smart Growth America and its program Transportation for America. Ben leads the national organization's broad efforts to integrate arts and culture into neighborhood revitalization, equitable development, and transportation planning. Ben is a graduate of the School of Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Tufts University, and MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Prior to joining Smart Growth America, Ben served as Executive Director of Station North in Baltimore. And with that, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you on this call and to all of our speakers, and would like to go ahead and kick things off with our first presentation on arts and health by Katrina.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you today about the intersection of arts and health. Next. As Jennifer mentioned, I have my master's in arts and medicine and am the California representative for the Arts Health Early Career Research Network. Full-time, I'm a design manager, but I pursue my passion for arts and health in a lot of ways outside of that through assisting with research efforts, advocacy, and volunteering. Next. The Arts Health Early Career Research Network is a community of over 1,000 members around the world that was founded by Dr. Daisy Fancourt in 2017. It aims to bring together early career researchers at the intersection of arts and health, provide learning opportunities, and support them to be able to lead their own research projects. There are representatives in many locations throughout the world to connect people locally as well as internationally. You can go ahead to the next one. Before we dive too deep, let's all share a hobby we've picked up since the beginning of the pandemic in the chat. Personally, I picked up dancing and sewing. Let's see what all you have been doing real quick. Dancing, hiking, cooking, piano, ukulele, gardening, paint by number needlework. Awesome, it's great to see what all of you have been up to, and thank you for sharing. Feel free to continue adding to the chat, but we can go ahead and continue to the next slide here. According to the UCL Institute of Epidemiology and Healthcare, there was a 22% increase in arts engagement from March to May of 2020. Next. FYI, when I say the arts, I'm speaking very broadly. This includes, but is not limited to, all the disciplines you see here. I'm also taking a holistic view of the term health, aligning with the World Health Organization and literature. Health doesn't just mean being free of illness, it also includes social, emotional, physical, spiritual, intellectual, and occupational dimensions of wellness, overall well-being, and social determinants of health. Next. That being said, what can the arts do for health? Next. Thousands of studies have been demonstrating the ways the arts can impact health and well-being. On the following slides, I'll call out some of the many benefits that have been demonstrated in the literature surrounding arts and health. Please note that the health benefits of the arts are not limited to what I call out here. Also, I noted examples of which dimensions of wellness each benefit might be most applicable to in the top right. However, these are not exclusive either. The first benefit I'll mention is the arts' ability to improve social cohesion and help people feel more connected. In a time where we all feel the impact of social distancing way too well, I'm sure this is relatable. The example here is a music video that was created during the pandemic and involved people dancing and playing instruments all over the world to dance while they were quarantined in their homes. Next. We're also seeing the arts addressing social inequalities. They can encourage and facilitate dialogue amongst people, even with particularly challenging topics. They can improve equity, create welcoming and inclusive spaces, and raise underrepresented voices. This example is an anti-racism repository from U.S. Center for Arts and Medicine, which is capturing many examples of how the arts are helping advance activism and address issues of racism. Next. As this pandemic has demonstrated, we must also take into account the well-being of workers on the front line who are caring for us. For years, the arts have been demonstrated as an effective way to help enhance overall health and well-being of our healthcare workers and caregivers. Engaging in the arts can help lower their stress and prevent burnout, which is prevalent in the healthcare industry. It can also help enhance their professional caregiving skills. Next. Fancourt and Finn identified some key areas where the studies are showing the role of the arts in helping prevent poor health. This includes things like mental health, trauma, cognitive decline, frailty, and premature mortality. Next. How many of you have felt stressed, lonely, or isolated in the past year? Many studies have shown how the arts can help lower one's stress and feelings of loneliness and isolation, while also increasing one's level of happiness. I'm sure many of you have heard of the example of people in Italy singing and playing music from their balconies when they literally could not leave their apartments. This is a perfect example of that. Next. The arts have been shown to encourage members of the community to live a healthier lifestyle. Studies show that they can help increase physical activity, especially in the realm of dance. The arts can provide mechanisms for coping and lowering one's level of stress. They can help engage groups that are typically hard to reach and get people more actively involved in their own personal health care. Next. You may have also recently seen a lot of graphics or even heard musical parodies asking you to wear masks, wash your hands, or socially distance. If these align with accurate health information, they can be a really effective way to disseminate key messaging to help increase awareness, prevent disease spread, and help manage one's health and well-being. In this context, studies show the arts can help with interest, engagement, dialogue, and spreading information quickly to a broad audience. Sankey and Golden point out how the arts can also be used to help model healthy behavior and shift cultural narratives. These examples here were from an open call for art from Amplifier to help spread public health info about COVID-19. Next. Sankey and Golden point out how the arts can also be an effective tool within research methodology and practice. The arts can help by highlighting key needs, facilitating dialogue, sparking interest, encouraging engagement, improving equity, and disseminating research findings in a meaningful and memorable way. Next. Studies reviewed by Fancourt and Finn shared how the arts can also enhance child development in a variety of contexts. It can help build the bond between a mother and her baby, enhance speech and language development, and help with learning and education. Next. Fancourt and Finn also found the arts to assist with management and treatment of illnesses, including mental illness and trauma, premature infants, patient care, autism, cerebral palsy, brain injuries, dementia, cancer, lung disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and end-of-life care. Next. Sankey and Golden are demonstrating how the arts can also assist with a variety of other public health issues, such as honoring culture and tradition and improving community resilience. As part of a working group and research lab, I helped UF establish resources and compile an open access repository to capture examples of the ways the arts are helping with COVID-19 awareness, prevention, and management. This is now a research that researchers or anyone in the community can access to show examples of projects, organizations, media, and studies at the intersection of arts and health during this time. Next. All the health benefits I just shared stem from two core recent sources, a scoping review from Dr. Daisy Fancourt and Sorsha did for the World Health Organization, and an evidence-based framework that Jill Sankey and Tasha Golden created for use at the intersection of arts and public health as part of their Creating Healthy Communities initiative. For more details, examples, and academic studies on each of the benefits I listed, I highly recommend you review both of these resources. Next. I also want to be sure to touch on the various contexts of arts and health. Around the world, terminology, you can go ahead to the next one. Around the world, terminology varies for the intersection of arts and health. Utilizing terminology that aligns with US and the National Organization for Arts and Health, there are 3 key intersections of arts and health in the US. Examples I just discussed came from all 3. Amazing things are being done as professionals engage across all of these realms, especially when there is collaboration across sectors. The 2 on the right are less known and the ones I specialize in, so I'll focus a bit more on those real quick on the following slides. If you'd like to learn more about the creative and expressive arts therapies, I recommend visiting the websites of those professional organizations. It should be noted that there are certain populations and contexts that should always involve a professional therapist. Next. Arts in healthcare involves the use of arts in clinical health settings. There are 4 key areas of arts in healthcare. First is healing in healthcare environments, which includes art, architecture, and interior design in a healthcare setting. The example on the left is a children's hospital lobby at UF Health Shands. The arts can be used to enhance the patient care through things like participatory bedside art workshops or performances, as you see on the right. Next. There's also caring for caregivers, which includes utilizing the arts to support healthcare professionals, improve their well-being, and reduce burnout. The arts can be integrated into health sciences education to help enhance key qualities needed in healthcare like empathy. Next. Arts in community health refers to the use of the arts in more public, non-clinical settings. It's a bit broader and not as clearly defined as arts in healthcare. Examples can be seen in health communication or participatory arts, like the examples from the COVID-19 pandemic seen here. The image on the right is from a socially distanced outdoor dance session in England that boosted morale of the community during the pandemic. Next. Community murals or art installations might aim to mobilize communities and advance social activism efforts, lift the spirits of the community, pay tribute to history and culture, boost pride and morale, or help us feel connected. It can also be seen in live performances of music, dance, or theater. You may have heard of communities making cheerful noise at a certain time to show support for healthcare workers on the front line during the pandemic. The photo on the right is an example of this happening in Seattle, where people played musical instruments on the sidewalk. Next. Research methodology and practice might include things like analyzing art created during a particular time to better understand health and well-being, collecting data via a public art project, or sharing results from an animated video. Next. You can go ahead to the next one. Along with their framework, Sankey and Golden suggest next steps for the intersections of arts and public health. This includes physically bringing health and social services together with arts and culture, partnering with artists on health interventions, hiring local artists to work on research teams, analyzing art and cultural artifacts to answer research questions, co-developing focus areas for cross-sector work, hosting joint convenings, and advocating for the arts to be included in Healthy People 2040. Dr. Daisy Fancourt also calls out the importance of looking at arts and health through the lens of multiple disciplines and perspectives, so I challenge you to consider ways you can impact this intersection. Here are some great resources I recommend you check out later, and then you can go to the next slide. All right, thank you for listening today. I hope you're able to learn something that inspires further collaboration across arts and health sectors. And now I'll pass it over to Ben and Mallory.
Thank you. I am gonna let Ben kick it off. Ben, if you are able, is your connection good?
I think so. Let me know if it's not. Hi, everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Couldn't quite tell my slide was up, but now I can see it. Thank you for having us today. Mallory and I are going to tag team the next piece, the presentation, of course, focused, as you see on the screen here, on arts and transportation and infrastructure. Go ahead to the next slide. So I am Ben, Director of Arts and Culture for a national nonprofit called Smart Growth America, which is based in Washington, DC. I myself live and work in Oakland, California. my national organization does a whole bunch of different things, focuses on transportation, smart growth, development, housing, and whatnot. But my team, as the arts and culture team, focuses on the three things you see here. When we have it, we give out funding to create exemplary projects and funds to work on transportation projects around the country, including quite a few in the state of California. We track the working of arts and transportation. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Project that Mallory and I worked on. Finally, we train practitioners who work on what I call Art 1 for engineers and planning for the arts to come together and talk past one another and really understand what it is they're trying to say and realize that their goals are quite aligned despite what it might look like. Next.
I can't hear Ben. I'm wondering if Ben dropped off. So Ben, are you there? Maybe turn your video off. Okay. I'm just gonna take it unless Ben, you can come in. This is the slide up here is the arts, culture, and transportation field scan that Ben and I completed back when we worked together at Transportation for America, which Ben's still the arts and culture director of. And in here, we did a national field scan all around the country, interviewing and doing some site visits to really get a sense of the landscape of how artists and cultural practitioners are collaborating with the transportation sector to address challenges and opportunities. Next slide. And through this research, we uncovered seven different typologies for how arts and culture practitioners, again, are advancing transportation work. And we worked with a brilliant illustrator to visualize these 7 different typologies. And it's really become a helpful reference point for anyone entering this collaborative space from the arts and culture side, from the transportation side, and kind of gives a sense of what's possible when you work together. Next slide. I'll just give you a few examples of what that looks like when we collaborate in this way. So our second typology, solution number 2, is the ways in which streets can become safer for all users when we're integrating this arts and culture lens, specifically for active transportation users, pedestrians, cyclists. It allows for a deeper sense of empathy when we're engineering these kinds of spaces. Next slide. Solution number 4 was engaging multiple stakeholders for an inclusive process. It shouldn't be a surprise to most of us on this call that arts and culture practitioners are pretty skilled at collaborative process, and many of us are very skilled at working with community members and can really bring this into collaboration with transportation agencies, local government, engineers. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, sorry, can you go back one? So just for the organizers, Ben fell off. I don't know if you can get him back on, but he's having trouble getting back into the Zoom. I cannot send private messages right now, so I'm just going to tell you that, and then I'm going to keep moving through the presentation as best I can. So one of the other ways that we see artists and cultural practitioners embedded in infrastructure change, as well as transportation, which has been, for me and Ben, a mutual focus, is the ways in which artists are more directly embedded inside of government bodies and inside government systems. Sometimes we call these artists in residence programs as well, artists in residence in government. Next slide. So we see these programs, they're popping up all around the country. There's been an artist in residence in a Department of Sanitation in New York since the late 70s. And now we see them everywhere from Chattanooga to Los Angeles to Grand Rapids to the Twin Cities, cities of different sizes, smaller towns. And really the idea here was this question of, in addition to having artists collaborate on these in these project-based ways, so in which I might be like a freelance artist and I work on a public art project, I do some community engagement work that's really meaningful, and then I go do another project. This way of working is really asking what happens when artists are deeply embedded inside of an actual agency and inside of a team and can impact policy, process, and can really be a creative problem solver writ large. So in addition to making artistic objects and ephemeral work, these artists are also thinking about governance and systems of governance as mediums through which they're enacting their creativity as a team member. Next slide. I've been doing research for about 3 years on this idea of artists in residence inside of government. And I just wanted to share, these are some of the really high level emerging themes that we're seeing when we're looking at these programs all around the country. And I won't go into detail here, but these are just some of the things that we're learning. So they're cohort models versus solo artists in residence. Obviously, there are funding challenges and creative solutions. Social change is really central to a lot of this work. Governments tend to need to be a bit risk averse for very practical reasons, but also there's cultural, kind of institutional cultural components there, and artists are kind of encouraging some risk taking and pushing some of those boundaries. So we're seeing a lot of really interesting things with this work, and we're working on research to help better demystify what this looks like. Next slide. So this is really Ben's work, and I'm not going to be able to speak in detail, but I can share kind of high level that Ben and his team started the first state level artists in residence programs, which is really remarkable to just do that advocacy work, get the funding, and actually organize to put these in place. So I commend them so much for achieving that. This is, oh, Ben, hi. We were just about to go into your slides.
It's interesting as it is to hear someone else present the work. They're not familiar with it. I can jump back in now. Sorry about that, everyone. So I'll do my best to pick up where I left off when my computer and Zoom both just crashed. Sorry again about that. So as Mallory was just saying, through all the work you just heard about, through some of the communications and translation of this work, I was able to launch 2 artist in residence programs within state departments of transportation, first ever at state agencies in this country. Here you see Mary and Kelly, the 2 artists who served in that role in Washington State. Next slide. They worked across the state from rural Eastern Washington to urban Western and Puget Sound, Washington. Next slide. And although they came up with a lot of different projects and discovered a lot of different ways in which artists can get involved in a giant 8,000 person state bureaucracy, I don't have time to talk about all of that. But really their goal was to meet with hundreds and hundreds of engineers, civil engineers, planners, appointed officials, and find out what I often describe as the pain points, what kept people up at night, and what 2 creative artists and designers could do to help them with that and streamline the work happening within bureaucracy. And a lot of what they discovered is that the people who worked for the state bureaucracy were themselves rather creative, but they were not given a real avenue to become creative people at work. They were there to be an engineer, they were there to be a planner. And so the 2 artists created this room. This is the code for the conference room they took over, and put together essentially a gallery of transportation art and really created a space for people to bring their full creative selves to work and brainstorm with the artists in this dedicated space for creativity. Next. They collected a lot of quotes from all of their conversations with folks. A few of them are here. And next. They then turned that into a divination deck. This deck of cards is really meant to kick off meetings. It's an icebreaker. It's all quotes from staff within this giant bureaucracy and really designed to get people thinking differently about the perception of transportation within the state of Washington. Next. They did a lot of fun things that weren't really necessarily focused on changing complex state policy or anything like that, but really focused on creating an appetite for this work, and part of that was a bumper sticker campaign. I don't know if you can see it on the screen here, but maintenance is sexy was definitely the most popular of those bumper stickers. I think actually the Secretary of Transportation has one on his car now. Next. And finally, last project I'll talk about is Maintenance Post, which this is a bit of a long story, but the artists really found that in any bureaucracy, there's a lot of excitement for new projects. This was a time when Seattle was having a highway torn down and a tunnel burrowed underneath the city, and there's lots of excitement for that, and actually a whole festival involving artists and performers when that tunnel was done. But the routine work of maintaining infrastructure, of clearing mountain passes, of repaving roads, there's never ribbon cutting for when the mountain pass is cleared or when the potholes are filled in. And so the maintenance crew actually loses. I just learned from some data today that 2020 was again the most dangerous year for highway workers on the roads. About a 10% increase in the number of highway workers who died across the country over the year before, unfortunately. And these folks are really just not that celebrated. They're seen as often interference in people trying to commute. And so the Maintenance Post is an attempt to create a newspaper, a regular newspaper, that talks about this important work and humanizes this work for people living in different sections of the states. This is the Eastern version that they created as the mock-up version of this, a document that the state DOT is now going to continue working with. I will now hand it back to Mallory.
I love that Maintenance Post. I also wanted to share just briefly another infrastructure project where I am directly functioning as an artist. So I work both as a consultant and I have a creative practice. So it's kind of wanted to demonstrate that dynamism. So I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. It's my hometown. We're creating a greenway called the Brickline Greenway. I was on a design team. The design team invited 3 artists specifically to function as artists on this team from the beginning. Next slide, please. This greenway is going to connect 17 neighborhoods across 20 miles, and we have about 25 plus equitable outcomes that we're kind of grading our success against. The arts and culture team, so it's these 3 artists, we were actually invited to create the aspirations for the design of the greenway. So here it's probably a little bit fuzzy, but there are 6 aspirations: unearth, heal, connect, cultivate, provoke, and envision. And this guided our design process. Next slide. This is just a sense of what the greenway is going to look like. Next slide. So our hope is that with artists involved in this large scale infrastructure project, it's going to go through again 17 neighborhoods, 20 miles, that we really develop a greenway that gives a sense of place where people feel engaged in the actual process of creating it, and it feels like it reflects them culturally, aesthetically, that it functions in a way that's useful to them. It takes them to the places that they need to go. This particular slide here is of a memorial that we're creating, specifically led by Damon Davis, an artist. That's a memorial to a Black neighborhood that was pummeled through eminent domain to create highways, a common ailment in many cities in the US. Next slide. Just quickly wanted to share one resource if this topic is of interest to folks. I am the curator of programming and partnerships for Forward, which is a new publication and conversation series by Forecast Public Art. We look at sector by sector how the arts and artists are helping to address the vital issues of our time. Our first issue was public health. You can go to the next slide. Our second issue was transportation. Ben was our guest editor. Our third issue will be announced shortly. And we have thought leaders, we have programming, we have a toolkit. Next slide. This is just an example of what the toolkit is. There's some talking points. We link out, actually, we've linked out to some of the resources in public health that were shared earlier. So this is a great space to explore afterwards. Next slide.
And I'll wrap up really quickly in the spirit of sharing resources. This is our new Smart Growth America's new resource, which might be a bit blurry, but it's transportation.art, easy website to find. Next slide, please. And there's far more in this site than we have time to go over now, but there's dozens and dozens of case studies, including some of the projects Mallory and I just talked about now, as well as dozens and dozens of others. You can search by the mode of transportation. Next slide. Location, approach, and then very relevant, I think, for this group, I interviewed a number of transportation professionals and artists who work at this intersection on what the talking points are that work best for them, how they're able to convince bureaucracies, funders, skeptical people out there who maybe should be working with artists but have not yet been convinced to do that, on which talking points work best for them under the views from the field section. So I encourage you all to look at that. You see 3 folks here, but there's several more others listed on there as well. Looking forward to the conversation later, and I will pass things off to Jason. There's our contact info if you'd like to know any more about us. Take it away, Jason. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. That was a great presentation about Smart Growth America. Typically I am talking about, the Destination Crenshaw project from the orientation of community engagement and artists participating in cultural placekeeping. So it's great to see that this, this idea is actually something that is taking place nationally. And I hope to, kind of show the intersection between the placekeeping, but now talking about the economic development and job creation opportunities. So that's what I'll be focusing on today. So next slide. The Destination Crenshaw project is a 1.3 mile stretch of Crenshaw Boulevard. And it is a cultural infrastructure project. So this project, the genesis of it was the Metro LAX construction was actually, they decided to make this project at grade for 1.3 miles of Crenshaw Boulevard in the heart of Black Los Angeles. It is the largest commercial corridor of Black business on the West Coast. And it's actually home of the largest intact Black community west of the Mississippi. So Mississippi actually has 1.1 million Black people, and LA County has 1.06. So for a lot of people, they don't actually know how integral the Black culture and the Black community is to the health of Los Angeles. And Destination Crenshaw is meant to be a solution for some of the systemic issues that we have around infrastructure, but as well as job creation and economic development and the health of our Black businesses along the corridor. Next slide. So this just shows a overview of the project. It goes all the way from Slauson Boulevard to the south, all the way to Vernon in the north. There will be a series of pocket parks, 10 along the corridor. We're creating 2.6 miles of open streetscape. That's sidewalks, bike lanes, seating for outdoor programming, but we'll also have innovations around narrative and storytelling. And this is where the artists and the creatives and the community have actually come together to not only think about, aesthetically how the corridor will look, but we'll have these 4 themes: improvisations, first, dreams, and togetherness. And it will be a curated experience. So people will be able to actually see and experience this as a cultural corridor. Next slide. And, the orientation of the entire project brought to us by artists and residents in the community is, our connection to African diaspora. The project itself is actually a story of Los Angeles, which is actually a story of migration. And for Black people in Los Angeles, we wanted this to be a root of, what this project is and what our orientation is to the future of our city and this project. So all the things in our project are really showing a nod to the African stargrass, whether it's the slant in the pavements, the shade structures, everything is really brought to brought to forefront by this design. And the reason why I bring this up is because this is what happens when you have artists in the room. When you have artists in the room, they actually think outside of the box, and they think about our cultural placekeeping efforts as a way to not only mark the space, but really challenge how we think about the future, challenge how we think about the aesthetics that are taking place. Next slide. And just going to show a couple of the renderings. This is actually a rendering of Sankofa Park, which is the northernmost part of the project. And we see this as a way it's going to be immediately south of Leimert Park, which is the Black Bastion of South Los Angeles. And we see this as a future programming space, a future place for people to come together to celebrate, but also protest and be central to Black community. Next slide. This is a cultural monument, so to speak, in South LA. This is the Crenshaw Wall. This wall has been reiterated by different crews since the 60s and 70s. And we're currently working with the RTN crew right now to recommission this wall, but also provide streetscapes and other structures to provide different opportunities for people to safely experience this cultural monument. Next slide. And as we make this $100 million investment, both public and private, to the Crenshaw corridor, there are different opportunities for value capture and job creation. So we'll have over 130 new construction jobs created by this project. We see this as important because there's $30 billion of future infrastructure projects in LA's pipeline currently right now. So we actually see this as an opportunity to not only build in the trades, but there's also over 200 public art opportunities. So we see this as a way to really revitalize and sustain the artist community in South Los Angeles through our public arts process. Next slide. So just wanted to highlight the curatorial process that was actually, developed out of our community engagement and design process. And this is actually led by Dr. Joy Simmons, who is on our team as our senior art and exhibition designer. And we have a curatorial committee that actually sends out public RFPs, reviews them, thinks about the exhibition of these RFPs, so where they will be as far as our thematic themes. And, this is really important because we work with the Department of Cultural Affairs in Los Angeles to really have these artists recognized as a public arts commission. And we see this as an opportunity to not only pipeline them for other opportunities, but those $30 billion of investment in public infrastructure all have a 1% for the arts designation. So there will be more arts projects to come down in the future for Los Angeles. And there is an opportunity where we have more arts commissions that need to be filled than artists. So we see it as our job to really think about this project as a way to create more opportunities, not only for now, but in the future. Next slide, please. So we see right now in the current pipeline, we have 6 cultural infrastructure commissions, which are acquisitions, they're signage, they're things that are actually working with the infrastructure project, and they've actually been folded into the design that Perkins and Will is working with right now. We have 9 3D permanent pieces that we are excited about being a part of this project, in over 120 2D opportunities. And this picture is just one of the opportunities. This is View Park High School. And we are working with landowners and commercial owners along the corridor to have them sign letters of intent, and then eventually review and agreements for these commissions to go on their buildings. And thinking about these as kind of semi-permanent opportunities for these artists to actually work with business owners to not only tell the stories that are important to them, but also have this art be such an integral opportunity along the corridor. Next slide. And these are digital opportunities, right? So we have 2D, we have permanent cultural infrastructure, but there's also digital opportunities. And this is thinking about our younger early mid-career artists, digital artists that have different opportunities on murals, banners, bus shelters, photography. Destination Crenshaw is really also looking at this as a way to really socialize art as a creative industry. And we see this project as a way to really give commissions to people who are really going to be showing their art in different forms throughout the corridor. Next slide. And the last slide is really just thinking about COVID response for artists. We really believe that not only Destination Crenshaw is a part of this, but I think that there are other organizations that are really looking at opportunities to support the creative industries during this time. So there's opportunities for the state and federal fundings, but also, Destination Crenshaw is looking for different partnerships and programming to make sure that we're facilitating more opportunities for our community artists to respond to COVID and respond to some of the challenges that we've been seeing, not only through the economy, but also the social unrest of last summer. So we're thinking about ways in which Destination Crenshaw can support these. And that's my presentation.
Hello, everyone. These have been such amazing presentations. I'm the last presenter, and I'd like to thank all of the panelists and Californians for the Arts. My project, actually, what I'm presenting is a project that was a collaboration between the Latino Center of Art and Culture, Teatro Nahual, and Teatro Espejo, excuse me, when CARES money became available as the pandemic hit. I'm sure all of you had the experience we had, and that was all of the artists that we work with finding that they had absolutely no income, particularly the artists from our communities that are the most vulnerable, as is our community, particularly during the pandemic. We were very fortunate to have a supportive mayor, Mayor Darrell Steinberg, who took the federal funding that the city of Sacramento received and made sure that that a large portion of it went to support the arts in Sacramento. We created a Sacramento Artist Corps, which is really was inspired by the WPA, putting artists back to work, particularly the artists from our communities back to work, to message our communities about staying safe during COVID-19. So we fortunately received the support from the city to do this. And we can go to the next slide. It really was an intention to make sure our artists stayed alive, to make sure that they were serving community during a pandemic. This actually was kind of a unique thought, a unique way to approach supporting communities. It was so very quickly done to put artists back to work, and at the same time living in our communities, we could see what was going on, where there was so much confusion, where people weren't using masks, where people weren't practicing social distancing. This was a year ago, as we all remember, and there was so much confusion from the previous administration about the virus. So we brought 40 artists together, and they created over 60, it was more like 100 pieces of work in different genres, and they were all paid between $500 to $7,500 over 2 months' time to create work. We'll take the next slide, please. One of our city council members was particularly instrumental in making this happen. I think, I'm highlighting those points about the support of our public elected officials, because that is what this day is about, getting our message to our elected officials. And fortunately in Sacramento, it was heard that during the pandemic, our artists were suffering, our communities were suffering, and they also joined with us and had a great belief in the power of the arts to address this situation. Next slide, please. So we had a budget of about $322,000. We had 2 months timeframe to make sure that this money was spent appropriately and that the messaging that we were trying to create was done, because that was the deadline. This money had to be used within 2 months' time. It was pretty daunting. So we had what we called core groups that worked on the philosophy of each one, teach one. Why did we do this? Because it fit the guidelines. We needed to get money to artists, but it was not an employment program. We needed to show that we were training artists for future jobs once the pandemic was over. So we put together groups of artists that actually shared their skills with one another to create the work around the pandemic. Next slide. So we had, excuse me, we had a visual arts core. This group of 7 artists was charged with coming up with visual representations that could go out to our community as posters, as coloring books, and online to message about staying safe. So this one image is a little raccoon washing his hands. I'm not sure if you can see it quite distinctly, but the top, you can see the bird at the very top. The bird has a mask on. Next slide, please. We had a live stream core, which was extremely successful. This is the former or current poet laureate in Sacramento, whose live stream was just fantastic, with very lively discussions with community members about what was taking place in their community, always emphasizing how important it was to practice social distancing. All of the messages that we heard were interspersed during these live stream discussions. I think there were about 100 live streams that took place over this 2-month period. Next slide, please. We also did cell phone photography. This was a very special group because it was of young people using their cell phones, and they were trained to use their cell phones by one of our artist, Andres Alvarez, who's a photographer. And it was as amazing to him as it was to them, the exchange they both had in this training. And mind you, all of this had to take place virtually or in very selected spaces outdoors so that they themselves could stay safe. We had a storytelling core. This was really more like spoken word. And all of this is available, by the way, on our website, on the Latino Center of Art and Culture's website, all of the samples. Next slide, please. The theater core, actually, the last piece of the theater core will be streamed in about 2 weeks. And it's a play that was written by Tomas Benitez and myself for the theater core, which brought up, which had 2 theater pieces that we streamed. And all of the rehearsals had to take place also in virtual time. So it was quite a challenge. Next slide, please. There was a music group, the Corona Chords. They've actually stayed together. These artists did not know one another. This is Sacramento. It's not a big town, but most of these artists didn't know one another. And as they came together, they created new songs. And it was, again, another experience that was as important to them as it was to our community. Next slide, please. There was a video core that created videos that were also streamed out to our community. And all of these products are available and are still being used. One of the most successful examples we had of the artist core was the next slide, I believe shows it, is a coloring book that was printed and distributed to food banks and to sites where free lunches were being delivered or handed out to people. Next slide, please. And the coloring books were black and white images of the murals that were created, actually large panel pieces that were created that are going up around town. And this was so successful. The elected officials loved this. This is something that we can take to them, and they've actually reprinted. We've had a city supervisor ask that it be reprinted and distributed even more diversely in his district. Next slide, please. Here's another example of the black and white images. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk lastly, I want to wrap up my presentation with some of the challenges we faced. And I think the one that surprised me the most and took some time to get over was some of our own artists who hadn't quite wrapped their minds around what the vision and the mission of the Artist Corps was, and that is to serve community. Yes, to create work, but it was to serve the community with these very important messages. It was challenging with some artists for them to internalize and understand that we as artists have to be, during a national crisis, civic responsibly, act civically as responsible citizens to demonstrate that we are part of the fabric of our society, that artists have an important responsibility to use their work to be working for our community's health, for the welfare of our city at a time when we were in great crisis. So that to me was quite a surprise. That it was 2 months was very difficult to create so much work in 2 months, to not be able to meet physically. It was a challenge. And then the bureaucracy, of course, all of the detailed documentation, the financial reporting, all of the, because these were federal funds that came through Sacramento, it had to be, every I had to be dotted and every T needed to be crossed. But it was a fabulous, fabulous project. And now we are being asked around the country for our experience, our proposal, the budget. I'd be happy to share all of this material with anyone who wants it, because there are other cities and other organizations that would like to develop an Artist Corps. And I think that's it for my slideshow. Yes. So this is where you can go to see the work that was created by the Sacramento Artist Corps. Some of it is really just quite lovely, and has been extremely, extremely useful in Sacramento. And I just think it was a fabulous project that we can take. It's something practical that we can take to our elected officials and advocate for arts funding, because we are so connected to our own communities in this very important way as artists. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to all the panelists and speakers for these really enlightening presentations that get us thinking about how we can work across sectors to build more, healthy, just, and equitable communities. Just a few quick notes before we jump into Q&A. We had a bit of fuzzy slides and some technical issues. I want to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available maybe later on today or definitely by tomorrow. And then we'll also be distributing a copy of the slide deck to all of the attendees. So there's a lot of really great clickable links, resources that were shared, and you will have access to all of that. So I guess I'll start it off. There was some mention, so we'll pull everybody up here. I want to make sure I can see everyone. There was some, mention in the chat about, not surprisingly, people having some challenging experiences working in transportation with public agencies, and really, getting that value across for working with artists and other creatives. Ben, I wanted to ask you, you had alluded to a publication where you interviewed and worked with some transportation planners and found some really effective talking points. Can you go into some of those effective talking points that you uncovered?
Sure. I think Mallory probably covered a little bit of this while I was disappeared. I'm sure she did a wonderful job with that, but I can go into a little bit more detail. So I think in all of the publications that were described, including our new website, transportation.art, the Forecast Forward publication, and then the Art Place field scan, there's a component in each of those about how to pitch art and artists to transportation agencies. It's something that I've always included because, as evidenced by this panel, it's a question that always comes up. There's inevitably somebody who says, I create wonderful works of public art, and I went to my transit agency or my state DOT, and I was turned away and told that wasn't relevant. So for me, and I put this in the chat, which I know is flooded with lots of different comments, it's really often about understanding what that person you're talking to cares about. And as somebody said, and I responded, state DOTs are not mandated to support the arts. There's other state agencies that do that, of course, just like a state arts council is not mandated to move people around and think about, transportation infrastructure necessarily. I always like to make people think more holistically and broadly, and often push state agencies, local agencies to think in that way. But it's really about understanding what the goals are. In California, there's real strict guidelines about reducing vehicle miles traveled, essentially getting people out of cars so there's less congestion, less greenhouse gases emitted. So part of that is about making transit more appealing, more accessible, contributing to the infrastructure and making it more personable in many cases, also improving headways and actually making trains arrive on time and things like that artists necessarily can contribute to. But it's really about figuring out what those real goals are. And that's how all those different animations you hopefully saw before are organized. A lot of it's also about road safety. There's been a huge increase I mentioned with highway workers, but really with all pedestrians being hit and killed on roadways across America, including California over the past year. And there's a lot that artists can do to contribute to that in terms of creating essentially distractions and things that make people pay more attention to what they are driving through. I could say a lot more about that, but I'll pause there.
I want to just add to that, Ben. I'm a visual thinker, so I think there's this Venn diagram of like what the transit agency wants and what artists and art can do. And then in the center, there's an overlap. And sometimes that language is not around art, but it's growing community trust. It's creating safer sidewalks, crosswalks. So that's often where I start is where's that overlap? What are our shared goals? And using that language and kind of beginning from that point.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we're all visual thinkers here, and that's really useful to apply what we do internally in our own organizations with what we do, outside of our organizations as well. We also have some folks on the call that are representing cultural districts, and I wanted to sort of ask Jason and Mallory in particular about your thoughts on creative placemaking, which a lot of us maybe are more familiar with, and creative placekeeping. So, what are some of the challenges and opportunities, both with kind of short-term interventions and this kind of longer-term sustained effect on place?
Mallory, please. I'll let you. Another.
I just spoke. I was going to give you.
There's a bit of a hopscotch that always takes place on Zooms, but I think for Destination Crenshaw, we think about it as a placekeeping initiative, and I think the reason why is because we are trying to ensure that Black LA exists with the changes that are taking place. There's already a lot of concerns around displacement and people having to, move because of these transit-oriented developments, which is like the phrase of the day in Los Angeles. But really what happens is the value that's created by these projects, it creates an unlivable situation for people that have been systemically oppressed. And because of, projects like Destination Crenshaw, hopefully we're able to have some place keeping initiatives that allow people to see the investment in the community being for them and for their future. And we can ultimately change the orientation to improvement in Black and Brown communities, because, we want to see more projects to improve our neighborhoods. We deserve equitable cities and communities to live in. And that's why I think art is such a powerful tool, because we can tell people or we can show people. And that's why we chose the aesthetic solution for Destination Crenshaw, and why it was so important, because it is not just any old transportation project. It is the transportation project for Crenshaw. And we want community ownership and pride to be really a part of the conversation when you're thinking about changing people's habits and culturally how they live. We want people to take more public transportation. What does that mean for a driving community in Los Angeles? It means you've got to make it for them, right? So I think, that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is create a permanent safe space for Black people in Los Angeles, and using infrastructure and art as a part of that.
And I would add that so the two phrases that you used, Jennifer, were creative place keeping, creative place making.
Mhm.
And so I think some of the challenges there's some negative associations that folks have, I do too, with the creative place making, which feels kind of like a top down. It doesn't feel like it's something that the community created. And creative place keeping feels like this effort of resilience and this effort to keep people in place and keep the spirit and culture of place alive.
Mhm.
I think one of the challenges is that there is a pattern of like art washing that we see in a lot of communities. Jason, I'm sure you have seen it in LA. I've seen it in a lot of communities. And that danger is that when, like, we all deserve beautiful places. Beauty is a basic human right. Communities of color, low income communities should be beautiful places with amenities where people can be happy and healthy. The challenge, though, is that sometimes when we bring all of these aesthetic improvements and beautiful infrastructure, people get displaced. Bunch of investment dives in, and no one can afford to live there anymore. So I think that's really the big challenge and the opportunity right now in this work, is how do we create these beautiful places that are culturally reflective, where the people who live in the place, especially those who have not been at the center of driving change, get to stay where they live. And I believe that needs to be like an artistic and aesthetic effort, cultural effort, as well as policy.
Mhm.
We cannot have just the art without some policy to help keep people in place. There are, anti-gentrification strategies, anti-displacement strategies. Ben might also have some insight because we worked on a little bit of that together. But that's kind of where I see like that turning point right now that we need to be careful about.
I said in 30 seconds or less, really quickly, whenever this topic comes up, I generally just say, the issue is capitalism. It's a really hard thing to deal with. This phenomenon that we're all talking about is not the bug, it's the feature. It's the way things are supposed to work. Investment's supposed to come, and it's supposed to displace people and bring investment and bring higher income folks to a place. That's how people earn a return on the investment they bring. Unfortunately, that's just the way capitalism works in our country. So I support anti-capitalist efforts like community land banks and trusts and things that essentially take things out of the private market. And I think that's really the only way to get around something like this. And that could spawn a much longer conversation, but I see lots of questions showing up. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have a health related question. I had one written down too, but we know a lot about kind of what I would describe sort of as the soft power benefits of arts on health and healing. So reduce stress, improve social cohesion and connection. But, healthcare is a huge industry. There's a lot of funding there. How can we as advocates make a better argument to really invest in health and arts outcomes and interventions?
I think that one of the core challenges is truly recognizing the needs of the healthcare industry and really diving deep into the understanding of what it is that they're looking for. I think kind of what some people were speaking to earlier in the chat and verbally, just really understanding the needs of the industry and kind of getting the ability to speak their language, the types of terms that they're looking for, conducting research that is meaningful to the healthcare industry. I think that's a really big part of it. And so expanding our perspectives and yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the heart of it, I feel like. Incorporating them into the conversation as well. Collaborating across the sector, collaborating with doctors and nurses and researchers in the healthcare industry, I think is really important.
So Katrina, if you were to, meet with a healthcare administrator, maybe a community hospital, something maybe outside of a research setting, who would you want on your team to have this conversation? Who are the important people to have at the table?
That's a great question. I think it kind of depends on the context. But ultimately, it's you definitely want to try to involve someone with decision-making power if possible, or as much as possible. But I think if anyone that you can connect with who can then kind of be a voice for the arts within that industry. So I think ultimately any staff member at a hospital, for example, could help be an internal voice for the arts and an advocate just in so many different locations.
Great. And yeah, and you have such great resources in your presentation. So I think once that's shared out, I really encourage people to explore the links and resources there and great case studies. I wanted to maybe turn it over to Marie. Marie, you were so successful in Sacramento with quickly organizing and galvanizing a team to respond quickly to COVID, to advocate that CARES Act funding could be used to employ artists and really use them to promote health and safety messages. What are you doing now? And because I know that was more of a pilot project, and how are you thinking about the American Rescue Plan funds? Are you, working with your team again to secure additional funding, and what does that look like?
Yes, because it was limited funds, we are going to be expanding the project as we can with new funding as it becomes available. And I think one of the reasons why we were successful in such a short period of time bringing this project together actually stems to a question that I think Phil Esparza asked earlier in the thread, and that was how do we bring our other community-based organizations into this fold? And I was reflecting on our background. Phil and I come from the Chicano theater movement, and as activists, we were activists first. And artists kind of secondarily. Our communities had needs. As a Latino community at the time, our work focused on bringing up issues of racial inequities long before it was even talked about. What are systemic racism? Long before it was talked about, they were out in the fields talking to farm workers about why it was important to organize. And so I think that the ability to address this problem came from those decades-old activists, the importance of the arts as a tool for activism, as a tool for social messaging, as a tool to organize and strengthen our communities. So yes, we will be seeking more funds because we as artists must play a crucial role, continue to play this role. And I think many of our artists who maybe saw themselves separate from society, and I think that many of our artists in this country think of themselves that way, have come back to see, because of this crisis, have come back to see how important it is that we are part of the society's fabric, and we must be engaged. And I find this whole panel so enlightening and wonderful, with these great examples of how community and the arts have come together. The Crenshaw Project is just fantastic. So I think that we need to keep that at the forefront. Our artists, the arts community, artists must engage, continue to engage, and stay engaged in what is deeply affecting our communities and have for decades and decades and decades.
Marie, thank you for that. And I think, we're talking about healthcare, when we're talking about like equity in our communities, like the difference in how long you live in a Black community versus another community is almost 20 years in Los Angeles. And the visceral feeling that you have when you walk around a disinvested community can affect that. right? Like what you see aesthetically can really help you breathe easier, if not breathe at all, right? So I think the things that we're asking of these different industries, we can actually have people think about normal solutions for them, provide a better place for people to be in, and more people that live from that space participate in that change. I mean, I think that's what we're all saying. How do we provide, I won't use the phrase a seat at the table, but how do we create more opportunities for people to make the change and facilitate resources to them so that they actually benefit from it, right? So we're not weaponizing people of little to no privilege to actually drive these, rallies and drive these movements, but then give them no tools at the end of the day to actually create the change. Right. So if we're working at the level of infrastructure, if we're working at the level of policy, these are ecosystem issues. Right. So let's create the ways in which we can facilitate the resources, because I think that, having these kind of macro level conversations is only as good as these connections. Right. Because I'm taking notes during this conversation. We need a DC Arts Corps. Right. Like, so I'm going to call you and say, all right, how do we make this happen in South Los Angeles? We need a smart growth toolkit to really go through all these talking points so I can wade through the waters of bureaucracy to be able to actually get to the yes in some of these conversations. And we need these healthcare solutions to help people actually expand their lives past what the expectations could be because of these systemic issues that they had nothing to do with, right? And I think that, ultimately, the intersections that we're talking about today are, the opportunity when we're having conversations like this to create these partnerships and then create change.
Jason, that was a great way to sum it up. And I know in your presentation, you were talking about cultural infrastructure. And I think moving forward, maybe we'll talk a little bit less about arts but we'll talk about cultural infrastructure as our own field, with its own, policies and support and funding and, as a way to build consensus and move things forward. I wanted to take the perspective of someone just getting started. And this is a question for the entire panel here. If you're new to the field, maybe new organization, small budget organization, and you're looking to develop these cross-sector projects or partnerships, how do you recommend getting started? Where's the low-hanging fruit? What are some just very practical tips and advice you would have? And anyone can take this on.
I can start with one idea. Actually, I see Marie, you're talking, but you're muted. You want to go first?
You go.
Okay. I often suggest to people, and this is an issue that's partially of my own creation in some ways in the way I talk about this and talking about artists embedded within bureaucracies and draw that line in the sand of non-artists and artists. And that's not really a fair distinction. There are many artists who work as planners, and they're also engineers, and they're elected officials, and many of the projects that are featured on the website I've shared a few times and that I've had the privilege of working on are successful because there's somebody in a position of power who has an artistic practice themselves, or they are associated with the arts in some way. And so for me, it's about finding those people who have overlapping interests like Mallory described. They sit at the middle of that Venn diagram, and they're usually the people who can help translate whatever it is you're talking about, the pitch you're trying to make, to their superiors in a way that is receptive to them. So find those allies within the agencies you're trying to work with and work through them.
Well, I'll just say that I'm a hopeless romantic for the political process. I believe that political representation matters. So go to your local representative and tell them that their job is dictated by the number of votes they have that support their effort. And then actually talk about what you would like to see. And I think people would be surprised at the reaction that they get from a representative in their local area, and how supportive that, they're also looking for people that want improvement in their community as well. So the Destination Crenshaw effort was created by the council member now, Marquise Harris Dawson, and community members, because they came together to really think about a solution. So I think that there are more opportunities for other efforts to really start organically in that way.
I second that. Second that, Jason. The Artist Corps would not have gone anywhere had we not had the support from Council Member Eric Guerra and our mayor. However, that support didn't just magically appear, out of the air. This has been years and years and years of the artists in our community basically making the point, telling that story. And if it's going to take even longer to, I think, elevate the work that we do so that it is in the same place as our Chamber of Commerce. We're still out there on the fringe, but we don't remain a fringe if we organize. And Sacramento, for example, recently started a regional arts alliance led by The Verge and Liv Mo, who's just a great visionary of bringing the arts community together for this very reason, to keep what we do in the forefront of our elected officials. And as far as like where to start, I had someone approach me and say, hey, we're starting a 501c3. Could you contribute to the legal process? And I said, let me see what you're due first before you file your 501c3 papers. Do the work and show your stuff. Don't jump into it hopefully thinking that if you have a 501c3 status, you're going to get funding for what you do. It just doesn't work that way. It's so hard, I think, now than when I started 40 years ago. It's so hard, so difficult. Don't give up, but we face a lot of challenges to create arts organizations, to be an artist in this society. It's really tough.
And Maria, I'll say to that, I also, I have a finance background. So when people come to me, I tell them, don't start a nonprofit, start a business. Think about yourself and as a way to empower yourself and to set yourself up to be able to actually benefit from your talents. And plus, do you want to deal with the board? So like, think about that too, right? But at the end of the day, it is around how do we actualize as people, as artists, as a community, and empower people to really be able to benefit from the access to resources. So I tell folks, let our political leadership in our local governments drive change systemically, and have them hire you as a consultant or a business owner to support that effort. I think that is very important for not only the creative industries in South Los Angeles, but just everybody to start kind of, you're a business, you're a micro entrepreneur. This is you, right? And you can do this together.
Great. So in the final 3 minutes here, I just want to do a quick round, and if everyone could just share sort of the main advocacy initiative campaign effort that you personally are going to be focused on in the next few months. I'm just going to put you all on the spot there. Let's see. Marie, you want to share first?
Getting the next stream of funds that come in from the federal government to the local artists. It's been I've been a bit dismayed that the money has come and then it stops at an agency where they take a cut, and then it goes down to another agency and they take their cut, and then it goes down to another agency, they take their cut, and finally maybe $1,000 will get to an artist. That's ridiculous. So I want to keep my eye on that, and we'll be advocating for the money to go right to the hands that needs it.
Great. Mallory.
Trying to get artists in residence in government at the federal level.
Great. Ben.
Lots of advocacy efforts underway. One big one is trying to help transit agencies return to the ridership levels they were at before the pandemic, so they can actually survive and our cities can function in the way they are supposed to, and we can all meet our climate and economic goals in the future.
Great. Katrina.
Personally, I'm going to try to work on continuing to build out my understanding of the various sectors that overlap with the arts and health field. and also encourage others to learn more. And advocacy is something that's a little bit new to me. So I'm going to try to work on building my skills with this and see how I can get more involved.
Great. Yeah, we're all learning, Katrina, we're all learning. And Jason.
So we've signed our notice to proceed. So we are mobilizing to the construction site for Destination Crenshaw. We have a 70% local hire, which we are excited about. So we'll be focusing on our Crenshaw community for those trades jobs. And you know, we're trying to build an equitable Black space in South Los Angeles. So we're very busy and we need everyone's support.
Great. Well, it was just so wonderful to hear from all of you. And I want to just extend our heartfelt, sincerest thanks to all of our panelists and speakers and to everyone on this call. I want to remind you that Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month is active all month long. You can share your experiences, perspectives, use the hashtag ACCM2021. You can also still register for sessions happening later today. The program goes through 6 p.m. It's up here on the screen. And finally, we will, like I said, be sharing the full slide deck with everyone who registered for the workshop. And I encourage you to contact the speakers, follow up on links, and continue on with your advocacy. So thank you again so much. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.